The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and the gentle hum of wind chimes carried on the breeze. Willow Creek was everything Mark and Linda had dreamed of, quaint, peaceful, and seemingly perfect. After 35 years of hard work, raising kids, and dealing with the daily grind, they had finally reached the golden years they longed for. Their new home, a charming one-story with a wraparound porch, sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was the kind of neighborhood where neighbors waved from their porches, and flower beds lined the sidewalks. "Feels like a dream, doesn't it?" Linda said, gripping Mark's hand. "Better than a dream," he replied, watching a pair of bluebirds flit between the oaks in their front yard. The moving truck had barely pulled away when a knock on the door interrupted their quiet moment. A woman with perfectly styled silver hair, a navy pantsuit, and a clipboard stood before them, smiling, though there was something calculating in her eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek. I'm Judith Thompson, HOA president," she announced, as if she were royalty greeting commoners. Mark shook her hand, surprised by her iron grip. "Pleasure to meet you." Linda, ever the hostess, smiled warmly. "Would you like some iced tea?" Judith waved a manicured hand. "Oh, no time for that, dear. I just wanted to personally introduce myself and remind you of our HOA policies. We like to keep things orderly." She handed them a thick booklet bound in glossy paper. The Willow Creek HOA Covenant and Bylaws was written in bold letters across the cover. Linda flipped through it, her brows furrowing. "This is extensive." "Oh, just little things to maintain our wonderful community," Judith said sweetly. "For example, all front doors must be painted from our approved color palette. I see yours is still that, rather loud shade of red." Mark chuckled. "We like it. It was Linda's grandmother's favorite color." Judith's smile never wavered. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. And we're very particular about them." Linda exchanged a glance with Mark. They had heard about strict HOAs before, but surely this wasn't something to worry about. They were wrong. A few weeks passed, and the Carters settled into their new life. Everything seemed idyllic until the construction trucks arrived. One morning, Mark stepped out to get the newspaper and was met with deep tire ruts cutting across his front yard. A large construction vehicle, caked in mud, was parked at the end of the street. His stomach tightened. Their once pristine lawn was ruined. He followed the tire tracks, leading directly to a house under renovation. Workers bustled around, unloading materials. Mark approached the foreman. "Excuse me, but your trucks have been driving through my property." The man barely glanced at him. "Talk to the HOA." That evening, Mark brought it up at the monthly HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse. He and Linda sat in the back, watching as Judith presided over the room like a queen on her throne. When it was his turn, Mark stood. "We've had some damage to our yard from the construction trucks. Can we talk about a solution?" Judith pursed her lips. Yes. The renovations on 214 Willow Drive are necessary improvements. Unfortunately, some collateral damage happens. But don't worry. The HOA has an excellent landscaping fund. Simply submit a request, and we'll consider covering some of the costs. "Consider?" Mark asked. "My yard is a mess. I just need the trucks to stop cutting through." Judith's smile was thin. "I'm afraid we can't interfere with essential community projects, Mr. Carter. But I'll note your concern." By the time the meeting ended, Mark was fuming. "She's brushing us off," he told Linda as they walked home. Linda sighed. "I don't want to start trouble, but we have to do something." So, they did. The next day, Mark installed a simple chain between two sturdy posts at the edge of his driveway. It wasn't fancy, just enough to stop the trucks. For the first time in weeks, their lawn remained untouched. Until Judith showed up. Mark was enjoying his morning coffee on the porch when Judith's white Lexus pulled up. She stepped out, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. "Mr. Carter," she called, striding up the walkway. "This is a violation of community aesthetics." Mark took a slow sip of his coffee. "It's a chain, Judith." "An unapproved chain," she corrected. "It must be removed immediately." Mark leaned back in his chair. "Not happening." Judith's lips thinned. "Then I'm afraid I have no choice but to issue a fine." The next morning, a crisp white envelope arrived in their mailbox. A $1,000 fine for unauthorized modifications to property. Mark was livid. "She can't be serious." Linda bit her lip. "Can we fight this?" Mark picked up the phone and called the county office. An officer confirmed the chain was perfectly legal. They weren't breaking any laws, just defying Judith. And Judith did not like to be defied. The Carters refused to back down. The chain stayed. One night, Mark was woken by a sharp metallic clank. He shot up, heart pounding. Linda stirred beside him. "Did you hear that?" she murmured. Mark grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. The chain was on the ground, the metal posts bent. Someone had cut it. Anger bubbled in his chest. He checked the security camera footage the next morning. What he saw made his blood run cold. Judith, standing at the edge of his property, watching as two men, ones he recognized from the construction site, snipped the chain and tossed it aside. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting them. This was no longer just about HOA policies. It was about power. And Mark Carter wasn't going to let Judith win. Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the footage on his laptop. His hands curled into fists. Judith had crossed a line. "They destroyed our property," he muttered. Linda, standing beside him, rubbed his shoulder. "We need to report this." "To who?" "The HOA?" He let out a bitter laugh. "She is the HOA." Linda shook her head. "No, to the police." That afternoon, Mark drove to the local police station. The officer at the desk listened to his complaint, nodding sympathetically. But as soon as Mark mentioned Judith's name, the officer's expression changed. "Willow Creek HOA?" he asked. "Yeah." The officer sighed. "We've had complaints before. But unless you have solid proof that she personally ordered the vandalism, it's a civil matter. Not criminal." Mark tapped his laptop. "I have video." The officer leaned forward, watching the footage. When it finished, he sat back with a slow exhale. "That's something. I'll forward it to the department." Mark left the station feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would end. He was wrong. The next morning, a final warning notice was taped to their door. Failure to comply with HOA policies will result in legal action. Linda read it twice, then looked at Mark, her face pale. "They're suing us?" Mark clenched his jaw. "Over a damn chain?" But as they would soon learn, Judith wasn't just suing them over the chain. She was coming for everything. The lawsuit papers arrived a week later. Violation of community standards. Unauthorized structures. Failure to maintain a harmonious aesthetic. And the worst part? A lien on their home. "They can't do this," Linda whispered, her voice shaking as she read the document. "They can't take our house." Mark flipped through the pages, heart pounding. Judith was using obscure HOA bylaws to claim they owed thousands in fines. If they didn't pay, the HOA could seize their home. Panic settled like a stone in his gut. "We need a lawyer," he said. Linda hesitated. "Can we afford one?" Mark didn't know. But he knew one thing: if they didn't fight, they'd lose everything. After calling multiple firms, they finally found someone willing to take the case. Jack Bennett was a grizzled attorney in his late 60s, with deep laugh lines and a voice like gravel. He had seen it all. HOA abuse, he said, shaking his head as he flipped through their documents. I hate these cases. Always the same story, an overzealous HOA president who thinks they're God. So, can we fight this? Mark asked. Jack smirked. Oh, we're not just fighting. We're going to burn their case to the ground. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal filings, depositions, and uncovering shocking information. Judith had a history. Jack found 6 previous lawsuits where Willow Creek's HOA had used similar tactics to force homeowners out. Each time, the homes were seized, then resold, often to people connected to Judith. It's a racket, Jack said. She's not running an HOA, she's running a real estate scam. Mark and Linda exchanged a look. Judith wasn't just a control freak. She was a criminal. As word spread about the lawsuit, something unexpected happened. Neighbors started talking. One by one, people came forward, stories of harassment, threats, fines for ridiculous reasons. An elderly couple was nearly forced out for having a bird feeder. A veteran down the street was fined thousands for parking his truck in his own driveway. Judith had kept them all scared. But the Carters' fight gave them courage. At the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse was packed. People stood, arms crossed, furious. Judith walked in, as polished and smug as ever. But this time, she wasn't in control. Enough is enough, a neighbor shouted. We're tired of being bullied. This stops now. Mark stood. Judith, you've been abusing your power for years. We're done. We demand a vote to remove you as president. Judith's smile wavered. You don't have the authority. Actually, Jack Bennett cut in, standing from the back of the room, they do. According to the HOA bylaws, with a majority vote, the president can be removed. A murmur ran through the crowd. Judith's eyes darted around. For the first time, she looked afraid. Mark held up a petition, signed by nearly every homeowner in the room. We've got the votes. You're out. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Then, someone clapped. Another joined. And another. The room erupted in cheers. Judith? She turned pale as a ghost. Why, you'll regret this, she sputtered, grabbing her things. But nobody was listening. Judith Thompson had just lost her throne. With Judith gone, the new HOA board dug into the finances. What they found was criminal. She had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from community funds. Fake fines. Kickbacks from contractors. Fraud. Jack made one last call to the state attorney's office. Within weeks, Judith was arrested. Her empire? Gone. The lawsuit against the Carters was dropped. The illegal liens were removed. And the HOA, now under honest leadership, reversed the outrageous fines placed on other homeowners. Willow Creek finally belonged to the people again. One warm summer evening, Mark and Linda sat on their porch, watching the sunset. Their red door gleamed in the golden light. You think it's finally over? Linda asked. Mark took her hand. Yeah. It is. The HOA had tried to break them. Instead, they broke the HOA. And in the end, the good guys won.